Hello friends and welcome to Ask Zach. Today we are going to talk about the earliest foot pedal or effect design that was ever released for guitar players, and it's the volume pedal. This one is from the late 1980s, but the design goes all the way back to the 1930s, and many manufacturers are making it even as far back as the mid-1930s. So we're going to talk a bit about the history. We're going to talk a bit about who I believe are the three most important players as far as influencing others to use the volume pedal. And then I'm going to give you some tips on how to shop for a volume pedal and things to watch out for, because volume pedals are notorious for either tone sucking or tone enhancing in sometimes not so wonderful ways. So we are going to talk about that. So while you're thinking about it, we'll go down in the corner and hit subscribe if you've been enjoying the show. If you've been watching and you've already subscribed, then I appreciate you supporting the show. There's a number of different ways. There's Patreon, which there's a link in the description for that. Also, there's a link to askzach.com where you can find merch like this It's a Sickness shirt. Also, there's good old tip jar information. All right, let's dive in. So the volume pedal was pretty much offered by most of the major guitar manufacturers by the mid-1930s, definitely by 1937. You have companies like Gibson and Rickenbacker and others, basically all of the companies that were making electric guitars with pickups on them, and especially ones that were also making lap steels, were selling volume pedals. I need to note DeArmond, even though DeArmond wasn't of course, a guitar manufacturer, they were kind of at the forefront of accessories, and of course they were producing the add-on. They had the first add-on pickup that you could put on your acoustic instrument, whether arch top or a round hole, with the sliding one or the round hole, sound hole pickup. And they introduced their own volume pedal in around 1939, 1940, pre-World War II. And yeah, the DeArmond was probably the most used and the most accessible, and that's what a lot of people used. And even Fender sold the DeArmond pickup through their catalog until they came out with their own volume pedal design in 1954, which of course was a nice chrome unit. And then other companies started, kind of getting in on the game. Bigsby made a volume pedal, as did Showbud, and a number of other companies. It really was mainly used by lap steel, pedal steel, or even non-pedal steel, guys that had multiple necks but no pedals. That was the main customer for these things. One of the rare exceptions would be Junior Bernard, who played, electric guitar with Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys in the late 1940s. And he used a volume pedal not for an effect or expression, but he used it so that he could get to soloing volume really quickly. So apparently Bob Wills, who was a fiddle player, he would just point with his fiddle bow to who was going to solo next, and you had to be at soloing volume right away. And so instead of having to, he had an Epiphone Emperor arch top, and it had one of the DeArmond add-on pickups that was on the little sliding metal pieces, what they call the monkey on a stick design. And of course the add-on volume and tone controls were away from it, and he couldn't get to them fast enough. And so he bought a volume pedal. And so he was using a volume pedal just to get to soloing volume quickly in the mid to late 1940s. It's not until you get into the 60s that you really start seeing guitar players use them. And some of the earliest guys would be Reggie Young. Reggie Young was using a volume pedal as far back as 1964. In my interview with Reggie before he passed away, he told me about his rig that he used when he was opening for the Beatles in 1964 with the Bill Black combo. It was a Gibson ES-345 with the baritone removed, because even then people knew that it was a tone sucker, and a Standell amplifier that had a single 15 JBL speaker in it, and he had a volume pedal. And that was his rig that he used. And he continued to use a volume pedal, and he gets more influential as time goes on. Another early volume pedal using guitarist would be Phil Baugh, who played on some of the early Merle Haggard cuts. So he played on Swingin' Doors. And if you listen carefully to the intro, you can hear that Phil Baugh is using a volume pedal, and he uses it to create some kind of quasi steel guitar effects. The volume pedal really catches on with guitarists due to two players in the 70s. One is Reggie Young, who of course I've already mentioned, and he played on a really important cut called Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues. That was a tune by Danny O'Keefe, and the song was a big hit, and I, in fact, am kind of referencing that in the opening licks that I played. Those are licks from Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues. And those were done, of course, with a volume pedal. And when that was cut in Memphis, and shortly after that, Reggie moved to Nashville, and he was hired on a lot of sessions because of that sound, that volume swell sound. So he's kind of the reason that Nashville players started using volume pedals. It was mainly because of Reggie. However, out in LA, the player that really put the volume pedal on the map was Larry Carlton. Now, Reggie learned about using a volume pedal from a pedal steel player, John Huey, who is famous for having played with Conway Twitty and Vince Gill in their kind of at the height of both of their careers. Larry found out about the volume pedal, also playing with a pedal steel player, but this was Buddy Emmons. So during the time when Buddy Emmons was living out in Los Angeles in the late 60s, early 70s, Larry played a session with him, really liked the sound that he got and the way he used a volume pedal on the pedal steel, and he told Buddy that he wanted one, and Buddy went and got him a Showbud volume pedal, and that's what Larry used on all sorts of recordings through the years. All those things with the Crusaders, and Joni Mitchell, and Steely Dan and his solo records, on and on and on. I actually had the chance to look at two of Larry's Showbud volume pedals, and they had Dumble buffers put in them. So they had an extra tuner jack, and they had buffers in both of them. So I thought that was very interesting, mod. And yeah, so with the work of Reggie Young in Nashville and the work of Larry Carlton out in LA in the 70s, the volume pedal began to become more of a usual kit for guitar players, and there began to be more demand. And the company that probably stepped up the most to kind of get volume pedals out there would be Ernie Ball. So Ernie Ball came out with this, a variation of this pedal in 1975. And Ernie Ball, besides being a string manufacturer, well, at first they were just buying strings made by another company, but besides being a string manufacturer, they were also a manufacturer or distributor of all sorts of accessories. So they had lesson books, chord books, amp corners, amp casters, handles, coily cords, all sorts of things. And they saw the demand for volume pedals and began producing this design. And this is not a 75. This is my volume pedal that I bought in around 89 or 90. And you can see it has just the two jacks on the side, and you can see it's string and pot design. So this is one of the main designs of the simple, passive vintage volume pedals is usually they have a simple pot and a string, and some of them have a, the design you'd see like on a vintage wah, where it has a pot that has teeth on it, and then there's the top part of the pedal that has a shaft that has teeth on it, and that moves the pot back and forth. So that's those are the kind of the two designs that you see the most of on old volume pedals. I guess we'll just go ahead and mention the next cat that really influenced the use of the volume pedal and helped popularize it, and that's Mark Knopfler. So Mark, of course, greatly popularized the Stratocaster, in the 1970s, and the number 4 position, and also helped popularize the volume pedal. Early on, he used an active Morley pedal, on the first couple records, and then he began using an Ernie Ball volume pedal, and that's what he was using by the time he did Brothers in Arms, which is very famous for its use of the volume pedal and a Les Paul and a distorted tone. Very beautiful work. So by this point, by the mid-1980s, it's pretty normal to see a volume pedal on pedal boards or even in rack systems. So Bob Bradshaw, of course, was making the crazy racks, and usually there would be a switching system, and next to the switcher would be usually a Boss volume pedal, which is about this size, but then extended a little further and would have a minimum volume control, and that was kind of what you saw on the LA racks. You tended to see these Boss volume pedals throughout the 80s. Into the 90s, and with the pedal boards coming back into fashion and starting to see fancy pedal boards built by companies like Techstar or Bradshaw or others in LA and Nashville, you really start seeing the Ernie Ball coming on strong again, and you see them on all sorts of pedal boards. And to this day, if you look at any session player's board, you're going to see a volume pedal. I think probably the one that you see the most now on Nashville boards is like this Dunlop. This is the Volume X, but various versions of this, and that's what you see on a lot of guys' boards now. It's a good design. It has a steel band instead of a string. I have actually broken one of the steel bands before. I don't know if that has to do with my size 14 foot or what, but of course they took care of it and fixed it. But yeah, this is a good design. So yeah, so volume pedal has really become kind of part of the rig. And even guys like Steve Lukather has used a volume pedal. Tim Pierce uses a volume pedal, and Tim Pierce has talked about using a volume pedal as a noise gate. And so that way he can use a single coil pickup guitar with a lot of gain and have a volume pedal, of course, after the gain effects in the guitar. And so that way he can pull back the volume pedal so that you don't hear any of that until the song begins, so he doesn't get in trouble with a producer or engineer. And I've heard Steve Lukather talk about that in interviews in print back in the 1980s about using a volume pedal in such a way. Yeah, let's talk a bit about shopping for a volume pedal or just things to know about volume pedals. Really, volume pedals tend to be in two categories, either active or passive. And a passive volume pedal, of course, is going to be some type of design that usually has a pot and a string or some other type of actuator. That's going to be like a Showbud, a Bigsby, a Simple Goodrich's, all those others. That's your passive design. Even this Dunlop is a passive volume pedal. It has a pot in there and uses a steel band. This little Boss that I have that I throw in a bag, this is the FV30H. It also has a little pot in there, and it's passive. Your active ones are going to have some type of buffer in them, and that's to try to help with tone suckage. And that's just part of a problem with volume pedals. So, because you've added another, you've added more wiring and you've added a pot, there can be some tone suckage, especially if you don't have some type of buffered pedal in front of it. And also, if a volume pedal is not calibrated properly, well, a passive one, well, then you won't get the full rotation of the pot, which means you're losing volume and you're losing tone from it. And a good way to test that is to just get a good old-fashioned true bypass looper. So this is just one that Dana down at True Tone made for me. And so it just has an in and out and a send and return. And so what you would do is you could take this with you, to a shop, and of course you have your in from your guitar out to your amp, and then you put the volume pedal in there, and you put it in the toe position, all the way on, and then you can just click this back and forth, and you can see if it's messing with your tone. See if it's letting all of the signal pass or not. Some of them are not calibrated properly, and some of them are just bad designs. So that's a good way. And you can also do that with active pedals, because active volume pedals have circuitry and a buffer, and sometimes they can enhance things in strange ways. And that's just the problem with having another stage of amplification, which is what a buffer is. And so not all buffers are created equal, and it's really hard to make one that's flat. So usually buffers tend to have certain happy areas where they tend to kind of hype certain frequencies more than others. And I don't think any of them are terrible. Also, sometimes they will change the feel, the way the guitar feels. I know that sounds like a strange thing, but it's like, when there's a connectiveness between you, your instrument, and the amp, and sometimes certain pedals and certain amplification stages can do interesting things. And I know that's going down the rabbit trail, but it's a sickness. Okay, so other things to look for in volume pedals is usually the taper is not super smooth, especially on the pot, the passive versions that have a pot in there. And so there will be certain areas of the throw where you're going to get more volume change than others. And that's just kind of part of it. And so that's part of going out and trying a lot of volume pedals. The most even ones tend to be the active ones that are not using a pot. So there's ones that use, light technology or magnetic technology like the Lely and others. And those are all, really, really good designs. I've noticed that some of them have little jumps. So, and this is something to watch for. And that's where, if you go to the heel position off, and then you go forward, some of them feel like they don't go 0 to 1. It's almost like they go straight from 0 to 2. And so it seems almost like a hiccup. So that's something I watch out for. And again, that's just something where you're going to get the volume pedals out, and you're just going to try them out and see what works for you. I think the true bypass thing is a really good tell right away to see if it's hyping your signal or sucking your signal, as it were. So if you can't tell, I'm not a huge fan of the volume pedal. So I like the effect of it. I know it's super useful. It's incredibly useful for studio players, because they're constantly having to change their level while they're playing, and they can't reach down and touch their volume control. So I get it. I understand why it's important. I try to not use one. And when I do use one, I tend to use one before my pedals, which is not even the best way to use it. Because really, the best place to put a volume pedal is after your gain effects and before your time-based effects. So that way you can do swells, and then of course you get the delays trailing off. Another reason why I don't really love using a volume pedal is because it got to be such a thing. And it really got to be a big thing in the 90s where, it seems like guitar players were being asked to sound like keyboards. And this continues to this day, with using a lot of delay, a lot of verb, and swelling these chords and things. And it's kind of like, why don't you just have a keyboard player do that? But I think it really got its rise during the 90s, during the singer-songwriter phase, when it was kind of like, and I did it myself, not on records, but I backed up these singer-songwriters, and that was one of the best things to do. At kind of these coffee house gigs was, they were finger picking on acoustic guitar and singing, and then you could sustain these chords behind them, and it helped fill things out, and it sounded good. But yeah, part of it is that the whole swell thing has been done a lot. It's been done a whole lot. So I don't do as much volume pedal work unless it's just necessary. But I still like it. I still love the work of Larry Carlton and Reggie Young and Knopfler and all the other guys that have helped popularize the effect. So there you have it. There's my spiel on the volume pedal. And now it's time for our Book Nook segment. I just need to set this down and grab my book. So, I'm bad about suggesting out-of-print books. And that's because a lot of the books I have on my bookshelf are out of print. But these things are definitely out there and can be found. And I think they're worth searching out. And know that I'm not, selling anything or profiting in any way from recommending these books, because there's no way to do so. So this is a favorite book of mine, and this is from a series that Guitar Player used to do, and I wish they would continue. They used to do books that were collections of interviews, and so they would pick their best interviews from certain eras, and they would put these books together. So this one is called Country Musicians. And so this one utilizes interviews from both Guitar Player and from their sister publication that's, long gone, called Frets, which was more acoustic instruments. And this features, interviews with everyone from Reggie Young and Jimmy Weibel to, Bill Monroe and Ricky Skaggs and Waylon Jennings and Albert Lee and James Burton. And this is a wonderful collection. Chet Atkins, Jethro Burns, Mother Maybelle, Roy Clark, Floyd Kramer, Lester Flatt, Hank Garland, Emmylou Harris, Doug Kershaw, on and on and on, Sam McGee. This is a wonderful, wonderful book, and it's basically a collection where if you wanted to find all these interviews in these magazines, you'd have to spend, more than $100. You probably have to spend $200 trying to track down all the original magazines that had these interviews. So these are out there. This is called Country Musicians, and it was released in 1987. And it's a great book. I learned so much from this, and this has been a great reference for me. And most of these are not online. These are not interviews that you can find online somewhere. So this is very much worth tracking down. Of course, I always suggest that you check out, eBay and anywhere that you would look for older books. And it's worth tracking down. And I'd pay $20 or $30 for it or more. It's worth it. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.